All right, thank you. All right, hi everybody. My name is Kelsey Hansen. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Watchable Wildlife Coordinator for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I am on the Communications and Public Engagement Division that is within the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And I am located in Olympia, Washington, and report out of our headquarters office here. But I do work all across the state for wildlife viewing activities, whether it be coordinating or supporting partners or actually leading activities and presentations, a whole bunch. So I do some really cool work across the state with many partners and people for birds and elk and bats and whales. So it's pretty cool gig that I have, and having this grant opportunity is just really it's really special and a great way to engage with so many people across the state. And I've been with the department for about 2.5 years now, which feels like it's gone so fast. And this is the second cycle that I've been running the Watchable Wildlife Grant. So I'll go more into the history of the grant in a bit. And so I'm going to be giving an outline of the presentation here in just a second. But I want to also let folks know that we have a WDFW staffer, actually my supervisor, Leah Althauser. She uses she, her pronouns as well, and she is our community involvement and education manager. And she's kind of in the background here, helping with tech support and assisting with the chat and throwing in relevant links for any sort of web pages that might be of help to you all, as well as maybe like PDFs. But so she's here as well. And so I'm going to be going over what wildlife viewing is for this presentation and going over the actual application that is now live for the grant. And then I'm asking that people save their questions until the very end of the presentation, because there will be an opportunity for us to go through questions one by one and really make sure everybody's walking away having a clearer picture. And if there's anything that I can't answer, you are more than welcome to send me a follow-up email and I will assist the best I can. All right, and I think that's all I needed for this slide. Oh, one more note is I just wanted to let folks know that this is going to be recorded for later viewing and posted online within the next couple days, assuming I don't hit any tech problems. But you can share this recording that will be posted on the Watchable Wildlife webpage, or the grant webpage specifically. And so you can spread it far and wide and watch it at a later time if you need it again. And I have extensive notes on my second screen here. So if I'm looking away, it's because I'm really making sure I'm not missing any extra pieces. All right. So the application for this year's Watchable Wildlife Grant is from April 1st. So it just opened a couple days ago. And then it will be running through May 30th for applications. And that's of 2025. So it's about a 2-month period. And you have until the very end of that day on May 30th to submit applications. And we do not review or accept applications that come in later than that date. So please work to reach that deadline. And so the Watchable Wildlife Program has been in the department here for, gosh, it seems to be like since the 90s, very long time from the history I've gathered. And Watchable Wildlife it can also be referred to as wildlife viewing. And that is a recreational activity of observing animals or signs of animals in their habitats. And so that can not just be the wildlife themselves, but it can also be signs like scat nests and tracks. And it doesn't have to just be one certain species or one category of species. It really can be consumptive or non-consumptive wildlife, and it can be fish as well. It can be pollinators. It can be frogs. It can really, arguably all wildlife and fish can be viewed. So it's very broad and far-reaching, which is really exciting, and it reaches rural audiences as well as urban audiences very greatly. And wildlife viewing can also include habitat exploration in person, so actually going out to see wildlife or being in person viewing animals, but it can also extend to viewing wildlife virtually. And so that would look like a live camera. Maybe some folks have heard of Shadow and Jackie, the very popular bald eagles right now. And so that's a perfect example of engaging with wildlife while being able to be in any sort of space, home or work or school. I know I put Shadow and Jackie on like a separate screen if I have another task going on. Um, and I like to also include wildlife viewing or include wildlife photography within the definition of wildlife viewing. And the US Fish and Wildlife Service also includes wildlife photography as well as maintaining plantings for the specific purpose of watching wildlife. So that would be like, I really want to watch more butterflies in my backyard, so I'm going to plant more native plants that will bring butterflies to the yard. So that can be included in this as well. And the funding for the Watchable Wildlife Program has always come from this bald eagle license plate. So if you've ever seen the bald eagle license plate, you can thank it for all the wildlife viewing activities that the department does. So this funds my role within the public engagement division, but it also supports a portion of funds for some of our district biologists that do work across the state. And some of our bios do participate or support wildlife viewing programming or other activities or material creation. So it's kind of split amongst the department, but the funds for this grant are solely coming from the bald eagle license plate. And if you're ever curious about what the RCW is, which is kind of just like the rule that steers the program for watchable wildlife and any of the projects that I focus on, you can read the RCW there. It just kind of goes into some more language, but there's some broader interpretation to that as well. All right, so the grant began in 2021. This was actually before my time, and then I inherited it, and it runs every odd year, so every 2 years. And the reason for that being that the agency's biennium, which is our funding cycle, happens from July 1st of an odd year, and it runs through to the end of June in 2 years out. So this year, our next biennium is going to kick off on July 1st of 2025, and it'll be running through to June 30th of 2027. And so by offering the grant earlier on in the year here of the biennium in this odd year, then it provides grantees with as much time as possible as I can give them with receiving the grant. So it's about a year and a half where people have projects to, or time to work on their projects. And every time this grant has run, it's been a $30,000 amount. And we ask that people request at least a $5,000 award minimum. And so that means total 6 projects could get funded if we were to divvy up the $30,000, which is totally, that has happened every cycle so far, although it's not a have to. So if there's one really big project that we select, it's like it was perfect. And depending on the competitiveness that year, we might choose to provide funding for one project, but there's a likelihood that we would be divvying it up to multiple recipients. And for the last couple of cycles, we've had about 4 recipients. So this is the schedule that is what we're going to be running on for the grant. So the application is open and it'll be running through May. You are attending the virtual public information session, and it's getting recorded and posted for later. And then after the applications have all been received at the end of May, we'll be spending 2 months to review applications. And there's a couple different cycles to that, and I'll explain that later in the presentation. And then recipients are notified in mid-August. But I also having applied to many jobs in my past, I find it also very important to know if you did not receive funding. So I will be notifying everybody who has applied whether or not they've received funding this year. And in August to September, it kind of varies depending on I guess, just the workload that our contracts team has. We will be working with the grantees on receiving information and collecting contract drafts and sending that off to our contracts team. And then we'll be getting those contracts issued. And by the end of September, I have a goal for everybody to have their contracts completed so that they can begin their projects. And they have until towards the end of June in 2027 for all of their project deliverables as close to completed as possible, or at least like the report outs will be received at that point. Any other deliverables, and then all costs should be requested for funding at that point. And it's a reimbursement based grant, which means projects can't be refunded for work that's been done before the contract has been started. So if you're doing work right now and you're hoping to get this part of your project funded with this grant that'll be awarded to you later in fall, we can't make that happen. We also can't make that happen if it were to be like in July this year after the biennium's already started. We have to make sure that contract is in place before we can provide funding. And with it being reimbursement based, we are requesting you have to send us an invoice, and then we will run that invoice through. I submit it for payment, and then you will receive costs back. So that's kind of if you look up on the website for the grant, it says reimbursement based grant. That's kind of what that means is you will be sending us an invoice for costs incurred. And technically you have until June 30th of 2027 to provide every last invoice or other deliverable information to me. So that is also totally okay. I'm asking for June 25th just because it gives me a few extra days to wrap up if there are any missing pieces and to communicate with our fiscal team on any invoices and get that to them in time. So I just want to highlight again that back pay for the grant is not allowed. So this September 26th date is kind of a rough date, but it's just to give an idea that whenever we can get contracts completed and squared away, if not this date, hopefully a little bit earlier, that is when your project will truly begin and when you can actually date back to get payment for. Let me double check I haven't missed anything. Nope, and then that's about it. Again, that date here in June is a few days early and it's reimbursement based. So those few extra days just give me a little extra time to get everything in. Okay, so this grant is intended to create, improve, increase, and/or promote opportunities to experience wildlife and/or learn about responsible wildlife practices. So that could be true engagement with wildlife viewing, getting to see wildlife in person. But it could also include information about crafting up like responsible wildlife viewing language. Maybe you need a brochure on how to properly view or responsibly view backcountry wildlife. That is great. And so we've included that piece in here. We're also asking that the grant benefit Washington wildlife and residents. So that means that projects must be taking place here in Washington. The bald eagle license plate funds will then be cycled back into Washingtonian projects and will be continuing to serve the public. The grant will also help raise awareness about wildlife conservation and increase biodiversity. And the hope is that a lot of education and continued engagement with wildlife, fish and wildlife, is going to increase awareness and therefore try to support wildlife conservation efforts. Having those really meaningful in-person or live experiences can be very impactful for long-term behavior change. So this is a great opportunity to really make some strong connections for people with the wildlife that they have as neighbors. And lastly, the grant's goal is to increase community involvement in wildlife conservation, like I mentioned just above with the biodiversity piece too. So getting more people involved in what's around them. This grant is not intended to fund projects that are primarily focused on habitat restoration or equipment that is being purchased for restoration. So this is an example. It's probably not the best one, but if you're looking to restore a space to make it a pollinator habitat and you need a tractor, we probably won't be funding the tractor itself because that is more of a restoration equipment purchase more than it is like actual funds to support the recreation of wildlife viewing. So that might not be funded, and habitat restoration can be quite a category in itself outside of recreation. So this grant is not going to be the best fit if you have a habitat restoration effort and thinking of like restoring a salmon bearing stream, while obviously very much has its merits and importance. That's not the goal of this grant and doesn't align with the RCW that is for the Watchable Wildlife Program. So I encourage folks to look up one of our ALEA grant that the department has had for a while. With the state budget concerns recently, there's just keep a pulse on that in the future to ensure that that continues to run. But if not this year, then continue to look up the ALEA grant because it's a great opportunity to support habitat restoration and even like educational components with aquatic resources. Also, this grant is not intended to fund community science and data collection as the primary goal. It could be a subset of your program, but the goal of this grant is really to focus on the recreational activity of wildlife viewing more so than the science component or the community science data collection piece. And we're also wanting projects to not be getting funded outside of Washington. We want projects to be really focused here in the state. And the grant also won't cover overhead costs, including salaries or benefits, additional administrative costs like electricity bills or rent, etc. So contract work is kind of an exception to this, as well as travel. Travel is included for both staff and for recipients because, or for public members you're serving, because a lot of groups still use personal transportation, and we want to make sure that people have a reliable way and are being compensated for access, both staff and attendees. So travel would be included, and contract work is kind of the exception to the overhead costs or to salary time. So for example, if you have a component of a project that you cannot execute yourself, like we're going to install a sign and we don't have, I don't know, a backhoe or something, and maybe you don't need that for a sign, but if you're installing like a platform or something and you really need larger equipment or support with that contracted labor, hiring a contractor is totally understandable, as would be like hiring a designer to create art for an interpretive sign or other educational materials. That does qualify for funding, but we do ask that there's a takeaway item or product for an outcome from that contracted work. So we are requesting that there's kind of a thing to show from having that contracted labor from something that you were unable to maybe staff or provide yourself. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few examples of projects. Some of these are hypothetical and some have truly been funded in the past, but I encourage folks to um, really be creative and think outside the box and not just follow these examples to a T, unless you're like, that's exactly what my project was going to be. Then please continue to submit, but I just wanted to provide uh, I guess some maybe inspiration if folks are looking for like what are even projects you've been looking at. Um, so incorporating ADA accessible features into a wildlife viewing space could be a great opportunity for folks. So that could include ADA accessible viewing telescopes. It could include uh, like um, oh gosh, something like lenses for binoculars or other materials that have lenses that, if you are colorblind, they allow you to see color, and additional pieces related to ADA accessibility. And there's also the opportunity for creating signage for a wildlife viewing space and to provide identification in a public area. So signs are totally great. And developing a regional wildlife viewing trail is it's a cool opportunity to provide resources to the public because a lot of people, one of the large questions people have about engaging with wildlife viewings, like where do I even go? Like how do I get started with this and what are like the best places to go wildlife viewing? And so having a trail or a map resource really gets people, can motivate people and help remove that barrier of uncertainty of where to start. Hosting an LGBTQIA plus community event to go birding together is an example. So providing a safe place for communities to come together and build connections with one another and just enjoy wildlife viewing together. And this photograph example is, so these are spawning salmon. But I wanted to share an example from a recent recipient. They were, so it's the Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group out of the White Salmon and Yakima area. They received a grant last year, and their application included bringing at least 600 students from about 10 schools from high poverty Title I eligible schools so that they could observe salmon and spawning in the Clay Elum River. And each trip was at least a 2-hour experience at the river. And they also had a component of their application where they requested funds to create a digital interactive map of watchable wildlife opportunities. So not just salmon, but additional wildlife as well. And it did include salmon spotting locations, and that was for their region in the Mid-Columbia area. And their plan was to have the map be multilingual and easy to use and free to users. And they have plans to keep it supported and updated for at least 5 years. So they had a couple of different components to their application and all really checked the boxes for some great wildlife viewing opportunities. I have another slide of examples, but I just want to reiterate before I move on that what we're really wanting people to think about in their applications and in their projects is like what is something your community or your space or your organization needs? What is the need? And how can you make wildlife viewing a safe, very important, fun, and inclusive activity? And how can you make sure wildlife viewing is truly the focal point, like the emphasis? If you have a project that starts to feel like it's leaning a little bit more towards restoration, please consider of how you can bring that back into the recreational focus of wildlife viewing. All right, just a few more examples. You can develop a pollinator garden in a schoolyard or a community space and label it with species information, or maybe you put descriptions in English and Spanish, or maybe you include tribal names with permissions if you're working with a local tribe on some materials, or you could accompany it with fish or wildlife lesson planning. So not just creating the pollinator garden, having like a resource that is there, but can be more of a passive resource for the public, really engaging people as much as possible with additional resources and making sure or trying to have folks walk away with a little bit more knowledge about the species they're watching could be really ideal and be more impactful for the community. And taking students from Title I school on a trip to a local WTW wildlife area or another area to find wildlife. And you can work with biologists or other community members to experience wildlife together and to learn more about what you're seeing. And you could also install a live feed wildlife viewing camera and feature that on social media or a website or another platform that you find valuable for your community. And so that's like the Jackie and Shadow bald eagle example that I provided earlier is a live feed camera. And this photograph here is from Cascadia Conservation District. They were another recipient from last year's grant, and they're from the Wenatchee-Chelan County area. And their application included taking fourth and fifth grade students from an after-school program to go set up trail cameras themselves and to work with some local biologists, and then stream and download those images and videos from the cameras. And so the kids were always very excited for when they got information about like what their trail cameras were picking up. And the funds that the grant supported were the trail cameras themselves and equipment, also any sort of subscription prices that came with the cameras, and also transportation costs for both staff and for students, which can be a barrier for a lot of people. And the content that was collected, the videos and photographs were shared on social media for both Cascadia Conservation District as well as for the school districts. All right, so who can apply? A very wide range. So individuals can apply, 501c3 nonprofits can apply, so can schools or universities, local and county governments, and also federally recognized tribes. We're asking that state and federal agencies do not apply, and WDFW staff members also are ineligible to apply. Okay, so we're getting to the portion here of the presentation where we're going to actually walk through these are just screenshots of the actual application. It's 4 pages long, so that's just 2 pages front and back. And Leah will throw into the chat the document for that, the PDF that's available, but also this PDF is now available online on the Watchable Wildlife Grant webpage if you haven't been on there this week. Okay, so first there's the instructions section in this upper half of this page, and this is contact information so that I can reach out to you. Our reviewers have an idea of what organization you're applying to on behalf of. It'll have your project title and zip code, information like that. Please fill out all these applicable fields. They are, I wouldn't say they're necessarily optional unless there's like a section that you truly don't, like if you're applying on behalf of yourself, you wouldn't need to fill in the organization name. But please fill out that information there. And if you're printing this application and filling it out by print, by pen or pencil, please make it as legible as possible, because if I can't read it or if our reviewers can't read it, then there's a likelihood that the application might not be getting scored as highly as it should. And I might also just not know who to email if I can't read it. So please make it as legible as possible in the process of filling this out if you're printing it. Okay, and then the first section here, on the bottom half at least, so this is really getting into the actual grant itself. So this is the introduction. It's a 150 word or less box, and we're asking that people please tell us about yourself or the organization that you're representing and the actual project or effort that you're proposing. And there's a descriptions section in just a moment I'll share with you, but this is to give kind of a high overview. really let us know about what your organization does. If you have a mission or a vision statement, that's where this piece can go. Okay. And next we have the project description. And this is 300 words or less for this section total. And so what that means is questions 1, 2, and 3, all three of these have to total 300 words. And we've increased this for this project description question specifically. We increased the word count just slightly since last year, and that is to just provide a little bit more detail, but we're asking that people don't go over that. This text field isn't character limited or word limited, but it is large enough to fill your answer plenty. And if it starts to look like, oh, that answer got a little long, we think they went over 300 words, we will be checking to make sure that you follow this word requirement. But it's 300 words, and that's to keep, we really just want to get to the meat and the real high points of your application. And so not to get lost in too many details, please focus in on the 300 words for this section. So the first part, question number 1, or this first bullet here, explain how your project is going to relate to watchable wildlife or wildlife viewing. Number 2, explain how the project creates, increases, and or promotes opportunities to view wildlife. And then lastly, clearly define your details, your goals, and your partners. So please be as specific as possible. Don't shy away from detail, and if you truly have partners in mind, it's to your benefit to notify those partners. You can attach a letter if you would like, but make sure that those folks are on board before you start to list them as partners without their knowledge. Okay, so this bottom half here, we're to the outreach and education section of the application. And I should mention, all of these questions are also online on the Watchable Wildlife Grant webpage. So they can all be seen there, and they're also going to be on this PDF, but they will match up to what's on the website if you want to review that in advance. Okay, so outreach and education, this is a 150 word or less section. So again, that's total. Both question 4 and 5 must add up to 150. Describe your target audience that you're trying to engage, and describe how your project will be engaging with your target audience. So what's your plan, and how are you actually going to be executing your plan and work with people? You might have an audience in mind, but how are you going to be actually very strategic and technical in how you're making that happen? All right, we also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion, or a DEI section of this grant. And sometimes this can be what separates applications apart. This isn't, so projects that do not have elements or considerations of DEI in their projects will not be disqualified, but this is considered to be a scoring component. So it's to your applications and your community's benefit to have this section thought out and fleshed out as much as possible. So the first question, explain if your project plans to address ways to be more diverse, equitable, or inclusive to underserved audiences, or explain that if it's imbued with equity and justice values. And then number 2, explain if your project plans to connect with an underrepresented audience, and if so, who that audience is. So this section of the application is the opportunity for applicants to really explain how your project proposal aims to serve the community in the project's location, and explain how the project intends to address or mitigate the barriers based on the equity-based approaches. So a strong application will state what the existing burdens and barriers are to the community that will be served. And it's helpful to include metrics in your application where possible. And that can include, but is not limited to, demographics and geographic information regarding the community itself, the identified community. And WDFW, our agency, will not assume what the barriers to wildlife viewing are for your identified community. We will assess applications based on the presented needs as well as any available data that is used to support your approach in your application and your project. So we'll be really looking for evidence that you provide about why the community or group you're serving is in need or has, why they would be a good group or a group that you are planning to engage with. There's more questions to this section. Oh, I missed it. Okay. What number are we on? Are we on number 8? Describe if your project plans to meet a stated community need or address a barrier to participation. Covered that just previously. And in your project, is your project being brought forward or is it being co-developed with the audience or underserved communities that you intend to serve? And please explain why or why not. So is there a plan to work with the groups that we are mentioning are would benefit from being further served? And is that happening or why is that not happening? And it's to your benefit to have communications with those groups and communities and form project plans together so that you know that what you're creating is going to serve the community that you're aiming to serve. All right, so we're to the methods section. This is 150 words or less. This is in the bottom half of this page here. So clearly describe how you plan to measure your success of the effort and describe how participatory data will be collected from participants, the public, and or the project. So this is the how. It's like we hear what you want to do, but how is it going to happen? What are you measuring? How are you measuring it? Are you going out and talking to people? Are you submitting email forms through a certain platform? Are you collecting qualitative data or quantitative data? All sorts of questions related to the actual data component as much as possible, and numbers are really valuable in this section. And yeah, I don't think I have much extra to add to that. And this is the last page, but at the top here, it's kind of subdivided into 12A and then number 13. But now we're into the operations section of the application. So it's 150 words or less for the section total, but there are some caveats or some exceptions, I suppose. So number 12, clearly define the requested dollar amount and the detailed budget justification. The word limit is not going to apply to budget outlines, and it's suggested to put everything in line item form that you're able to. And number 13, clearly describe use and costs of your budget in line item form. And again, the word limit doesn't apply. And what this means is please include as much detail as possible. Please include as much detail as possible when you're outlining your budget, and ensure that if you have a quantity of materials that you include that, or number of units, include costs when possible. It's to your benefit to also include links or separate attachments, which we'll talk about later, that might include specific items or images of items that you're looking to include to give people, our panelists, a greater idea of images and can picture the project a little better in their head. This could include transportation and really break down how many estimates for miles you think there might be or cost that you're getting reimbursed at per mile. So truly be as detailed as possible in this section. And it's to your benefit in the grant to include multiple facets of your project or multiple pieces of projects for funding. So what that means is if you're putting all your eggs in one basket, let's use that terrible tractor analogy from earlier. Let's say you wanted to get a tractor, and then you're putting all your funds into this one request for this one item. There is a chance that you could still receive funding for that item. But if for any reason we can't fund it or we choose not to fund it, then that opportunity to receive support for that part of your project kind of goes away. But if you have subsets of a project or multiple programs within your organization that you could use support with, flush those out and really delineate them and explain how they're different or what each section needs. Line item form is awesome. Spreadsheets are awesome, but not required, especially if you can just organize it in these text boxes. But the more specific you can have it, and the more detailed, the easier it is for us to understand what's happening with the project, as well as understand that you've put a lot of thought into the specifics of the project. And then if we're unable to fund all of your project requests, if you've submitted multiple facets of it, we might be able to say, well, we can't fund these 10 items, but maybe we can fund 4 of them or 5 of them. And so it can be a benefit to list multiple pieces. Yeah, I guess I can really just emphasize, do not give generalizations in this section of your application. And then last, I guess this is number 13. I don't know if I mentioned this as 13 earlier, but number 13 is clearly describe the deliverables for your project. And this has a word limit of 150 words to this category specifically. So I guess this isn't for the 150 words isn't for operations as a whole. It's just for this number 13. So this is going to be like, what are your goals and what do you plan to be the takeaways at the end of this project? Are you going to have a tangible item? Are you looking to serve a set number of people in your community? Really get into as much detail as you can here with what you plan to have be the end result and the end goal from the end of your project. And then attachments here at the bottom. This year, we will only be accepting one single PDF file application. So this document that we've been going through, this 4-page application, this is in PDF form, and we're asking that all attachments, whether they be budget spreadsheets or maps or images, we ask that everything is attached into one document. And that's to ensure that everything can be kept together. And it also creates for a much more streamlined scoring process. And then we can make sure everything you've submitted is in one spot. That is a requirement of the application process. And so any supplemental materials can be added on to your actual 4-page application. That might require using like an Adobe product or another resource, or someone you know that might have Adobe that might be able to support with that. Okay. So I mentioned we were going to come back to the scoring phases and what that looks like. So in June is going to be phase 1 for our scoring process. So that's going to be a smaller panel of reviewers that is going to be going through all of the applications, and we're really going to be scanning for eligibility. So that means there's a whole bunch of yes or no questions that are going to be filtering out applications from a high level, and that's to really get it down to applications who have been thoughtful in their process, as well as just really it's just narrowing us in. So we're going to be asking questions even as simple as like, was the proposal on time? Or is the project truly focused and oriented around wildlife viewing? And also like, were the project goals clear? So do we know what's happening with the project? Phase 2 is going to take place in July, and the plan is for this to have a larger panel of reviewers and they will be scoring all of the remaining applications that made it past that first phase. And so there's some more detailed questions. All of the questions are the same number of points. I believe it's 5 points across the board. So there isn't one section of the application that's worth more than the others. It's all even. And so there's going to be some more fine-tuned scoring taking place in this section. And at the end, we're going to average all of the scores of all the applications. If I or others have other remaining questions after reviewing your application, we can reach back out to a contact you've provided and ask you any further details during that time. And we'll then be coming to a discussion of which projects we think could get funded, as well as maybe which subsets of projects or applications could get funded. So like I mentioned earlier, if you have multiple pieces of a request, maybe we can support 2 of the 3, but not all of them. But we also might be able to support if you just applied for a $30,000 project and it's like really well thought out and really fleshed out, then there's still a chance that we can fund a project in its entirety. But that's kind of a helpful detail to think about, is having it broken into subsets. And then everybody, all applicants, recipients, everybody who's submitted an application will be notified of your award status between August 4th and 15th. So it'll be mid-August, which seems so far away, but I have a feeling it'll be here before we know it. Okay. Lastly, this year we added a frequently asked questions section to the Watchable Wildlife Grant webpage, and that's to support with answering some questions that many people were asking similar questions, and so we added it to the webpage to kind of help support fleshing some of those details out a little bit further. So please review the frequently asked questions section of the webpage, and if you don't have answers to your questions from there, then you can reach out to me. So this is the end of our presentation, but I just want to note a couple more details. This image here is actually a screenshot of the front of our Watchable Wildlife Grant flyer. And so if you are wanting to have a PDF flyer, it's front back, so there's more details further. But if you want to send that along, you can download it from the Watchable Wildlife Grant webpage and send that as an attachment, or print it or put it wherever you would like. Leah's going to send, if she hasn't put in the chat already, she's going to be putting in the PDF of this document into the chat. And you can ask me questions here with my contact information. So you can email me or you can give me a call. I do prefer email. I'm actually much faster via my email, which seems the opposite usually. It's a little faster with phone, but I'm faster with email actually. And I can also think through your question a little bit further or ask around. If I don't have all the answers, I will be able to mull it over and think about who to contact next and maybe forward it along if needed. So email's preferred, but I can also totally call. And I just want to, one last note that I have here is I just wanted to remind folks that this will be recorded and posted for later viewing, but we're getting to the portion where we're going to be asking some questions. We'll still record this section, and then you can watch this later on or share it with folks who weren't able to attend this evening. And I also have a link here. Leah will be able to send a link for the Aquatic Lands Enhancement Account, or ALEA, A-L-E-A, the grant program, into the chat in case folks throughout the presentation were thinking their application or their grant idea seemed to be more related to restoration based. Okay, we did it. Are there any questions?
Kelsey, we're getting some questions in the chat. Do you want me to read them to you?
Yeah, that would be great. I can't see what's happening very well.
All right. So our first one is from Tracy. And it sounds like they have a program where they're refurbishing old trails and viewing areas for wildlife viewing. Would that qualify?
Yes, yeah, it would. Um, I would take that opportunity to, when you're redoing the trails, I would take the opportunity to try to include, we'll take into account the accessibility of the trail, obviously, and sounds like that's already being considered. And if you could capitalize on being able to provide opportunities for viewers to sit or use a telescope, or I've even seen I've heard of a cool tactic where folks have done kind of like a trail where they tied ropes along certain points. And if you had vision limitations, you could actually hold on to the rope along the trail. And if you came to a knot in the rope, then you knew that there was an interpretive sign there that also had like braille or some other form of tactical thing on the sign. So, yes, trail enhancement can work, but be creative in how you think you can incorporate viewing components into the restoration piece.
Thanks, Kelsey. Our next question comes from Anna, and they would like to know how many applications do you receive in a typical funding round?
So the last 2 years we've averaged, or last two cycles, we've averaged around 55 applications. I don't know what to expect this year. There have been a lot of, I think, some uncertainties with funding sources, both on like state and federal level at this point in time. So I've been receiving a pretty good green light on making sure this grant keeps going forward. And so with that in mind, I don't know if there's going to be more applicants for this cycle. Um, and because we're still emphasizing DEI as an environmental justice as like a piece of this grant, I'd like to think that it's going to be a popular grant this year, but I can't say for sure. But that's what we've had in the last few cycles.
Okay, our next one comes from Kirsty, and Kirsty would like to know if you have more than one project ideas, do you recommend three separate applications or is only one per person allowed?
We've been requesting one per person, um, or one per organization. That's a good question. Um, and if you're able, you can pare it down and have, how do I phrase this? So if you have three different activities going on within your organization and three seem like they could be up for funding for the grant for wildlife viewing, then we've definitely had folks in the past outline their separate pieces. It can get a little bit harder because you have less word count to devote to each of those projects, but so it might be beneficial to pare it down a little bit. But that's not to say you can't include as many as you'd like. But yeah, one application is required.
Okay, now we have two questions from Teresa, and so the first one is, as a recognized Washington nonprofit, but not a federal 501(c)(3) nonprofit yet, would we qualify?
That might be a question that I have somebody email me. That is a good question. That might start to I'd want to check in on some further details behind that with part of our contracts team. But I'm glad you mentioned it.
Great. I will pop, Teresa, I will pop Kelsey's email in the chat for you. And then,
Thank you.
Teresa's second question is, you used the term attendee regarding mileage. Would that include a volunteer?
Yes, yeah, that would include volunteers. Um, I'm trying to be really mindful of the fact that transportation isn't always provided for volunteers or staff either. And so if that presents as a barrier, like if somebody doesn't own a vehicle, but they need to be somewhere for this project, I want to make sure that that's covered. But that also includes like bus transportation or um, we had a recipient who I believe was getting vouchers through the city for bus transportation, specifically to get people to their programming. So that's another creative route too for a larger group of people.
Okay, looks like we have a couple more. Our next one comes from Lily, and it says, for requesting the grant dollar amount, can that be a specific range or does it have to be a specific amount? So I think, for example, can I request between $5,000 and $7,000, or do I need to request $6,133?
I'd be as specific as possible, um, because if you're what a 6,000, 1,000, or 6,132, the number example you provided, um, what that tells me is that an applicant really went through and delineated as many specifics as possible. Like they really knew the quantities, the mileages, the tax, the details. That lets me know that they're really looking into the specifics. But that's not to say if you round it up a little to like 60, 300 or whatever the example was, if you round it up to account for if there were any considerations that were included, like taxes or something that maybe was unforeseen at the time of application, then I understand that too. But I do ask that people get as specific as possible rather than keeping it general, because then that tells us that um, there was intentionality and some thought behind all the details that are adding up.
Okay, it looks like we just have one more. So if our
Great.
remaining folks, if you still have questions, please pop those in the chat. But for now, our last question is from Nate, and Nate would like to know if there will be any exceptions to the no funding of staff time rule. For example, an entirely grant-funded conservation district wants to implement a project but has no money that can fund the staff time for on-site installation.
That's been I've gone back and forth on that a little bit. And at this point for this grant, we are not funding staff time or salaries for staff.
Okay, and it looks like one more question. It says, can we partner with another agency, DNR, to build a trail map from their data resources?
I think your data can come from, well, anywhere reputable. And I think they're very reputable. So I would say yes, it doesn't have to just be resources through WDFW. And it also doesn't have to just be WDFW biologists. Um, Although we're fantastic resources, we have wonderful staff, very knowledgeable folks, but it also, if you are referring to a map from somewhere else, same with like equity maps or something, like if you have resources um, that are reputable, then go ahead and absolutely you can use those resources. Um, because that feels very data backed and yeah, I think that sounds great. I hope that answers that particular question correctly, that I'm understanding it correctly.
That was great, Kelsey. I learned so much. This has been really, really informative for me, and I hope for others as well. I'm not seeing any more questions come in, so
I'll stop sharing my screen then for just a second so I can just, there everybody is. I just wanted to say thank you for everybody who's been able to come out, and thank you for your questions really help me a lot in understanding what communities are looking for or still have questions around. So thank you for coming and answering some questions and being involved. And again, my contact information, well, I guess I stopped sharing my screen, but you can contact me with whatever's on the Watchable Wildlife Grant webpage, my email and phone. And um, yeah, I look forward to continuing to work with people and seeing all the really awesome and creative projects that come through. This is a really awesome opportunity to see all amazing things that are happening across the state. I'm always very blown away and also a little bit jealous sometimes. Like that project is so cool. I would have never even thought of that. So I'm really excited about this and I was glad everybody was able to be here. Thank you.